let's get rolling. So Evan, I'm going to turn it over to you. I do want to, this is Allie with AGC. Thanks everybody for being here. I do see 2 people online that are dialed in from a phone. If you have the ability to use the Q&A to type in your name and company so that I can mark you as attended, I would greatly appreciate it. Evan, take it over.
Thanks, Allie. So thank you all for coming here and attending this evening. My name is Evan Clemson. I'm the chair for the Construction Leadership Council for AGC here in Oregon. We've got a great event planned for this evening. I want to especially thank Jeff and Allie here for helping put this together, and Geneva. She really pulled through to make this happen. So thank you all. A couple housekeeping items, like Allie said, we are using the Q&A format and the raise hand module. So that is how we'll communicate questions. Allie will be monitoring that and passing those questions through. So please type in your questions there. She'll read in real time and pass them through. As she mentioned, if you are logging in, make sure your name and email is available to Allie there. She will make sure people get CEU units and that kind of thing, and also log the attendance. And if there's multiple people in a group, so if you're in a group setting and those individuals want to be recognized as attended, please find a way to get to Allie. You can email her or through the chat function, something of that nature, to let her know who's there. Allie mentioned in the dialing in on the phones, same thing. Please get Allie your information and we'll get to it. So tonight we have 2 individuals that are going to give us some perspective on our construction industry in here in Portland. I think we all have burning questions on where we're going and where we're headed. So we have Dan and Jim here. They're going to give us a little view of their world and what they see coming. Jeff is going to be our moderator, so Jeff will help keep this ball rolling in the right direction and get those questions from Allie and get them answered from you. I think that's the only thing I have for housekeeping items. You know, I know this isn't our preferred operation or venue for doing these kind of things, and hopefully we'll get back to the in-person meetings here soon. But again, thank you all for attending, and looking forward to grabbing a beer and doing this in person here shortly. So with that, Jeff, I'll turn it over to you and let the ball roll.
Thank you, Evan. And I definitely echo that. I think it's a bit sad that we're not at Bridgeport or somewhere else, you know, in Portland right now, drinking a few beers and having some food and gonna listen to these guys talk. But again, thank you for showing up and showing support for the CLC and AGC. So we really do appreciate it. I think tonight's, you know, I think for everybody, you know, regardless of where you find yourself at in the industry, I think the topics tonight that we're going to go through are relevant. And I would just really encourage everyone, you know, I think we're going to dedicate probably the last third of our discussion tonight towards Q&A and just, you know, because I'm sure there's questions that we didn't think of that you know you would like to hear answered from Dan and Jim, and these 2 guys definitely can give some perspective on it. So please, at the end, we would love as much audience participation as possible. So I'm going to stop talking and let's just get going. And Dan, why don't you lead us off? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Jeff. So Dan Mells, I'm the Vice President, General Manager for Mortenson here in our Portland, Southwest Washington business. I've been with Mortenson for over 32 years. I grew up in Wisconsin, raised a family in Minnesota, and throughout my career, I've worked on large public assembly projects, sports projects, healthcare projects, quite a variety of projects. When you get to be my age, you touch quite a few markets. My wife and I moved out to Portland here about 4.5 years ago and have been growing our business here. And we just absolutely love it here in the Pacific Northwest. And so I just wanted to let you know that Jim, Mark, and I have talked, and we've decided we have all the answers to all your questions because we've been around for so long. So take notes and hold us accountable for anything we might have wrong here. So I'm just kidding, of course, but we do have some unique perspectives we want to share tonight. So thank you, Jeff.
And Jim, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Dan, for that intro. it's always good to tell somebody right before they're about to speak that they have all the answers or they might have all the answers. So I'm Jim Mark. I have spent the last 40 years working for the Melvin Mark companies here in Portland, Oregon, a commercial real estate firm that does brokerage, management, leasing, investment, and tenant improvement construction, and all sorts of different projects and spearheads projects. So, and we also have a capital group that we provide long-term financing for. Let me tell you a little bit. Our firm has gone through, pretty dramatic changes over the last 5 years. We had a core group of people for the first 35 years that were all together. And we've been reformulating our company here at Melvin Mark Companies with some new faces and some new products. The capital group we added about 10 years ago with John Peterson. And we arrange roughly $150 to $200 million worth of financing every year. A lot of people don't know that's available at our company. And then we also added Melvin Mark Investments, which predominantly for the first, definitely for the first 35 years of our company, we predominantly invested for ourselves, and now we invest for third parties and have third-party projects. And we can get into a little bit of that later on, but I thought I'd do a little bit of the intro. And I by no means at 61 have all the answers, Dan. I'm sorry, I try, but I think both Dan and I agree questions are really important out of this. And it'll be fun to touch on the topics that you care about. And I'm happy to go through some of the preamble beforehand, but look forward to the question and answer in the next section. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, gentlemen. So let's get right into it. So I think how we thought about structuring this was, we'll ask Dan and we'll ask Jim a couple individual questions, and then the majority of the time will be spent with both of them, offering an opinion on the questions they have. So Dan, starting with you, in light of the numerous events in Portland over the last year and COVID, what impacts, both positive and negative, have you seen to the construction market in Portland? And kind of a follow-up to that is, and what are the biggest roadblocks that you're seeing?
Yeah. So, Mortenson, we're a national builder. So we have offices in Denver and Phoenix, Minneapolis, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Seattle, and Portland. And so what I hope to bring is a little bit of a national perspective of, that some of our other cities have experienced things maybe a little bit different than Portland. I would say across the board, though, one of the biggest hits to the construction market is hospitality and retail. As a hotel developer, we developed the Regency Hotel, the Convention Center Hotel, the Hyatt Centric Hotel, the AC Marriott, and we had probably another half a dozen hotel projects in the works when COVID hit. And to a project, they all went on hold. And I think, especially in Portland, it'll be years before they come back around, which is really a shame because downtown Portland was growing so quickly and becoming so attractive to do business downtown, to entertain downtown, to live downtown. I think that one, the hospitality market took the biggest hit. Healthcare, we saw that a lot of healthcare organizations just quickly stopped any capital project, not because they weren't important, because they just didn't know what was going to come out of the other end of COVID, and if that was going to change how healthcare was provided. That coupled with they had cash concerns where they needed to make cash available to deal with the emergencies that were coming along with COVID. And so things slowed down dramatically, but there is also a pent-up demand or a pent-up need. Now I think the fastest growing portion of the healthcare business is ambulatory. And we're seeing some movement now as healthcare organizations are starting to look past COVID and regroup a little bit and get some of their projects going. It's no surprise that offices, there's very little of any construction of office space going on. Office vacancy increased 16% here. So downtown vacancy, I think it's over 1.7 million square feet of available space in downtown Portland in the Central Business District. So it'll be a long time before we see any office construction. And Jim has more experience than I do in that area, so I can let him talk to that when he wants to or later. On the other hand, computer chip, electronics, that business still is taking off, if not increasing, because of the demand for technology across the country. And so we've seen actually an uptick in that. There's an increased demand in the market for distribution centers and warehousing as people, shift to online shopping. That increases the demand for transportation and temporary storage, distribution centers, and so forth, which is taken away, of course, from the retailing. So those are some immediate short-term impacts we've seen to the construction market here in Portland.
I think we're going to touch on a lot of follow-up questions to that, Dan. So thank you for that. And Jim, I guess it's for your first question, and Dan touched on it, is, obviously over the last, year or 6 months, depending on, what industry you find yourselves in, we've been working from home. So in your experience in your industry, what is your best guess on what the new normal look like when and maybe if we are allowed to return to offices, and what trends do you see perpetuating once we do return to the office?
So Jeff, that's a great question, and we get asked, obviously, in our business, we get asked that a lot, of where we're going. And the one thing I can tell you, almost since COVID, broke out in almost a year ago now, our people in our firm have been reading sort of everything from the New York Times to our peer group, CBRE and JLL, and they published some excellent articles on the work at home phenomena. And over that period of time, we've listened to our clients, and we've sort of come not to any conclusions, because I don't think we'll know until the vaccine really gets people back into regular circulation. We see people comfortable, really going out to dinner, going to the office, their normal lives again. But I think there are some trends that you can pretty much bank on. One is older workers in the workplace that may have been close to retirement. How will they work? They'll probably work combinations of going to an office, working from home, working remote. And I know in my case, I was trying to get out of the office in the summertime on a Friday, and I have a beach house, and trying to work out of the beach house. But prior to COVID, our technology was okay. Now our technology is really pretty good. So, it allows people like me to, not necessarily go to an office all the time. I think it's a little far-fetched to imagine that people are going to work remotely completely, and that there's going to be just huge numbers of it. And the one interesting point was, we had a technology client that, really after about a month and a half of COVID, said, don't look for office space for us anymore. We're going to go 100% remote. We're going to give up our offices. This is the way we're going to be permanently, and we can work this way. 2 months later, they called us up and said, we need to resume the search. We're going to need office space. But again, it'll look different, and what they need will look different, and their needs and how they separate the space. But we've already seen, firms from Google to Facebook to other firms start to re-examine the idea that they're going to have all of their workforce work remotely. And again, I think a lot of firms will have people work remotely. We've had the ask on our firm from 2 or 3 people we have 50 full-time employees. We've always had a few that, really probably could work from home. But I think the issue is supervision. The issue is how do we collaborate? And a lot of books have been written on collaboration and working together. And I don't think anybody on this call would probably be a little remiss that some of the conversations we all have around a water cooler, conversations that maybe were around sports or their weekend activities, a hike, end up taking us to places that can relate back to business, and ideas are formulated. In this format, right now, I would be looking out at, Dan and I would be looking at an audience, you'd be looking out at an audience. And is this is this satisfactory for people in sort of a one-dimensional form? And, I've done different panels, and I can tell you it is very difficult to be a speaker when I can't see facial reactions. I don't get, there's no feedback back and forth. So I think you'll take a look at this once the pandemic, once we have enough shots in arms, and it starts to subside and people go back, what will that look like? And I think you're going to really start to see by late summer some trends. So it's going to be really interesting. And again, I'd be the last one. I think there's going to be a lot of changes forward, but I think the idea that, we'll lose 80% of the office space or even 30 or 40%. Our clients were retreating the amount of space they used 3 or 4 years ago. Every tenant that we had was pretty much taking 5 to 15% less space. And that's from an efficiency standpoint. But, things like, will people ride mass transit in high degrees, in a COVID type environment? These are all interesting questions, and we can explore them in the question and answer, but there's a lot of things I've read and evaluations, and the judge and jury are out.
I would say, if I could, Jeff, from Mortenson's perspective as a builder, the predominance of our people need to be physically working on a job site, and the people that support them, manage them, the project engineers and so forth, also need to be on a job site to be effective. And we found, even in the office with our marketing, business development, business services groups, that we're the most creative when we collaborate with each other the way Jim talked about. And we just simply have to get back into the office. Right now, we're doing our business, but we're not advancing our business. And I think there's going to be a challenge there, because there will be some team members that will tell you right now, well, I'm 20% more productive. I'm happier. I'm not dealing with challenges of commuting. I'm an introvert, so I like my introverted world. That's all well and good and may have a place in the construction business to a small degree. But to a larger degree, it's not, for us, it's not about productivity necessarily all the time. It's about what kind of creative results can you provide to the team during our strategy sessions and work sessions. And, the best ideas come when you iterate with multiple people, not sitting in your bedroom, cranking out spreadsheets. So I think that's going to be a challenge. One counter argument to that people are pushing back is that there are other companies or other industries, that they're going to promote the work remote. And so they're going to have a better chance of recruiting team members than I will, because I'm going to want, folks in the office most of the time, and they're going to let them work remotely. And so I might have a challenge recruiting against that. So I've got to find that balance as well.
I'm glad you brought that up, Dan, because I think that was one of the questions that you brought up in our meeting getting ready for this was, the people like missing that connection to people that you guys were both talking about. And also, I don't want to say the word, entitlement to stay at home, but definitely maybe that's something that we'll be dealing with for at least the foreseeable future.
So, and the only thing, Jeff, if I can just add one thing that I've missed, I'm a father of 4, and so my house was always really busy when I had kids running all the way around. And I'm on these calls all during the day where I just feel for mothers and fathers with kids at home, and the pace of having to take care of a lot of things at home. And I would explain myself as an extrovert, which when I was home all the time, I'm in my office every day. But it was really painful for me to sort of stay home too much. And I think you have that combination, but the really thing is the distractions at home. Can they work full time for people that work? And obviously there's people that does work really well for.
Yeah.
Well said. Before, I think this is the last individual question that we have, and then we'll jump into the kind of the both questions, a few questions for both of you. For Jim, you talked about, and I think Dan also mentioned it too, about things that you're seeing go up and other things like office space go down. So do you see market sectors becoming more prevalent in Portland than they were before? So for example, I think Dan, you were seeing an uptick in warehouse industrial space where office is down. So curious, and maybe we can honestly get an answer from both of you at this point, is what are you seeing, or maybe not yet, but you see it changing in the future where something that wasn't as prevalent pre-pandemic will maybe thrive post-pandemic?
So, I mean, one area that has just exploded is telecom. Obviously, with the people staying at home, there's a huge demand for telecom. And we saw a building trade downtown, the Piddock block, that traded at a world record price for Portland, Oregon. It was something like 3 times the previous record at like $1,400 or $1,500 a foot. And for those of us in the business, we were shocked. It traded at about a 3 cap. And it was due to the backbone of a tremendous amount of telecommunication. And we have a building in that neighborhood right next door. And we've had people, we have meet me rooms and setups where people can hook up into fiber. So that's been an explosion of need and the amount of demand that's out there. You touched on warehouse, but from Amazon to other providers, warehousing was growing at a pretty good clip before this. Now it's become sort of the favorite product. And I got off the phone a couple hours ago with a group that we talk to pretty regularly about where market trends are. And they're seeing, warehousing trading at very, very low numbers. And there's very little supply out there. That has stayed very strong through it. Our firm's developing about a 40,000 foot warehouse out in Tualatin. And we own about 1.5 million, with partners own about 1.5 million square feet of warehousing. And just recently, within the last 25 years, got into warehousing. So we were predominantly, most people know us as a downtown office firm, but that really only represents about 30% of what we partner now, and have other types of products, single product. And the one thing that, I sort of got very fortunate at, I've been buying suburban buildings because they were a really good value the last 6-7 years. And we picked up 5 Centerpoint. We bought the building in Tigard that was about a 40,000 foot building in Tigard. And the demand, not only from a COVID standpoint with the suburban market, but the taxation issue is really, and we can talk about that later, but the taxation issue in Multnomah County, city of Portland, really forced a lot of people not only to look closer to their home, but look to get out of Multnomah County, city of Portland. So those 2 buildings, we've been increasing the rates since COVID started, which most people don't realize. That part of office has done really well. And then we bought a building, I closed on it on the 6th of March. We bought a building down in Wilsonville, and sort of same story is it had been vacant for 3 or 4 years. It was a call center, and we were very fortunate. We found a tenant 30 days after we closed that took 100% of the building. And again, it was a little bit from a COVID standpoint that deal came all together, because the tenant needed something that they could move into right away, and that building was all set to go. So there's sort of winners and losers out of this. I think the permanent trend, retail is going to be really, really tough moving forward. I think, you're going to see a lot of retail contraction, but I think there's going to be opportunity in retail. And you see that the type of tenants that sort of flourish in this market are, Harbor Freight, the grocery outlet, a lot of the lower end sort of neighborhood driven retail still has a place. But the big retail, like you see with Lloyd Center, Washington Square, post-pandemic, I think it's going to be interesting whether those are really popular, or again, once everybody gets shots in their arms, everybody goes, whoa, I want to be with a lot of people, and I want to go shop in a store, and I want to see XYZ products. So I think that's sort of a wait and see.
Dan, any thoughts on that?
I'll add to that a little bit. On a national level, our data center business is taking off in a significant way for obvious reasons. In other markets, I'd say healthcare is pretty balanced in other markets around the country. And I'm going to get on my soapbox here a little bit here, but one of the questions I was asked here in the chat function, which teed this up for me, is, do we think from a national perspective that Portland is worse off because of everything going on in Portland, and in other parts of the country doing better? And that's a complicated, complex question. But my soapbox is that, both Jim and I sit on the board of Greater Portland, Inc. And our mission at Greater Portland, Inc. is to promote the Portland metropolitan area for businesses to move here and other businesses to stay here. And there's this horrible public perception right now that downtown Portland's still burning, and that there's, mass chaos. I get friends of mine from around the country, when I connect with them, they're like, are you okay? Because my wife and I live downtown, you know, are we surviving all that? It's like, well, there hasn't, other than in the last few weeks, there hasn't been much social unrest downtown. And at least, so I mean, compare that to other cities. So I moved here from Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Minneapolis was where it all started, as everybody knows. And there was significant damage to parts of, you know, along Lake Street and parts of Minneapolis, more damage than what we experienced here in Portland, literally burning buildings down and so forth. And right now, my gut's telling me, based on my conversations with folks I know in Minnesota, that they're actually dealing with, you know, they're having a harder time coming out of the social unrest that put all the plywood up in their city and downtown. But the perception is that Portland is in worse shape than other cities because of the media, the national media, and what they've done to us. And it is just, it's so incumbent on us to reverse that national perspective any way we can, so that people understand that downtown Portland is still very attractive, and get people back into downtown. And I know Jim and some of his projects, he's committed to keeping people downtown. We've got a couple of projects we're working on right now, some new builds in downtown Portland to show our commitment to downtown. But somehow our government leaders need to, and us as the private sector, need to rally around and change the national perspective of Portland. It is a great place to live and work.
So in the chat function, I'll just answer. Mike Salzgiver asked, and it's a really good question. And as I tell people, I've got two jobs right now. One is, you know, I've been trying to lead a bunch of groups on trying to bring Portland back. And one is the Portland Rose City Downtown Collective, which we hired a very left-leaning PR agency to help us guide through what is a very sensitive issue. And I can tell you, as Dan mentioned, when the violence broke out in May after the George Floyd murder, you know, there was issues that had been underlying in our, you know, in our life for a lot of years. And so the peaceful protests were something that, you know, as business leaders, we want to encourage, and it was a time of change. The problem was, by about June, I started to see, after a month of it, it was just a lot of people tearing things apart. And we saw more and more damage and more graffiti. And we just couldn't get the attention of local leaders. And it was the most frustrating. As I tell people, I go, you know, it's hard enough to have your business shut off. And we have a lot of parking spaces downtown and a lot of business that was just really negatively impacted. On top of it, we had people destroying things and really trying to tear everything up. We just couldn't get anybody from the governor really all the way down. The mayor tried, but our form of government, he was really just one voice, and they didn't have a full council at the time. So we went through a really difficult time. You fast forward to today, the mayor hired Sam Adams, and they have a recovery staff. As Dan said, now it's up to us perception-wise to start pulling ourselves out of this. We're starting to get populations coming back downtown. I was at a couple of full restaurants over the weekend. We need to start using a lot of the facilities. The perceived danger, yeah, there's homeless, and the homeless camps in some of the Old Town Chinatown area are still bad, but most of downtown has been unboarded. The fences have come down. Restaurants are starting to open up, and people are starting to circulate all the way through. And if we're going to all recover out of this, we need to be an ally of the whole area. And I think you'll see events and you'll see some changing. But the biggest thing that downtown lacks, the biggest thing our city lacks, is the lack of people because of COVID and how it's drained a lot of the resources. So again, shots in arms, and you know, maybe by May we get to some type of normal. And I think a lot of people have walked through the Pearl District or walked down 23rd or 21st. You start to see these crowds, and I walked 23rd on a Saturday or Sunday morning. There's people in lines waiting for coffee. It's going to start coming back. It's just the safety part of it and people's comfort level.
I see there's another question in the chat, but I think we'll get to that subject about, you know, construction and building in a second. I want to keep hitting on this because that was one of the questions that we had is, and you both have answered it to some extent, but I want to hit on more of that, you know, the work that you're doing with Greater Portland Inc., Jim, and actually, and Dan, you're on the board as well. But from a local politics standpoint, and we've talked about some of the Multnomah County and Portland being challenging in the sense of being business friendly. But what are some of the biggest risks that you see to specifically the construction and commercial real estate industries, and how can we as business professionals help mitigate those?
Well, some of the challenges that we deal with, because we're also a developer, is the process for getting buildings approved in downtown. Step one is getting it through the Design Review Commission. It's a very thoughtful process. It's a process that's important so that it maintains the integrity of quality architecture in downtown Portland, so we don't end up with just a mishmash of garbage buildings. I get that, but it is such a lengthy, protracted process. And then after that, the permitting process is extremely lengthy. And now the city, due to lack of activity or whatever reason, have had to let go some of the permit review folks. And so now it's getting even longer. And that process, it's taken all the drive and enthusiasm out of people that want to come downtown and want to design and build a building expeditiously. So if there's any way that we can, truncate that process, not give it up, it's there for a good reason, but shorten that process dramatically, that would be extremely helpful. There's another unique part of the permitting process that a project, if you submit a project, the core and shell of a building, you have to complete that building and have it open before you can submit a permit for the interior build out or the TI of that facility. So it's a very linear process, and having overlapping permits would, dramatically shorten the time frame from today to when we can get people into their buildings downtown. Jim, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry about that. I would echo, what Dan said. The issue in Portland is really going to be, how we sort of turn the switch back on, and the permitting process is only, one small part of it. But it's the perception. I worked on founding Greater Portland Inc. almost 20 some odd years ago. And it was because of the lack of coordination between the private sector and the public sector. There just wasn't. And what we saw by and large was a public sector driven process. And the private sector just wasn't heavily involved in it. So when Dan talks about design review, I think a lot of people on this call have a lot of sway in that process. And we have a good process. It's just the problem is I've gone through 4 or 5 in the last year during the COVID epidemic. And, most cities would say, we got to get these projects rolling. I mean, these people want to go spend money, but they're looking at the pipeline that's being built right now. And I think Dan would agree, they don't see that there's not much behind it. And that's what scares me sort of going forward. So, as we move, we've got to start looking a different way at all this process. And it just can't be, let's do it the Portland way anymore, or the Oregon way. We got to compete on an international and national level.
And I think leading to that, and Jim, you mentioned it earlier, when Melvin Mark has been purchasing some properties on the outskirts of Portland or in the suburbs. So a question that kind of ties in a Q&A, and one of the questions that we had prepared was, are you seeing trends where businesses are pulling out of the urban core and heading to suburbs like Lake Oswego, Wilsonville, or even, Gresham, things like that? And do you see that trend continuing or not?
I think, what we're looking at, and, it's a great question, and one that definitely in the short term, there's a move out of the core. It's not quite as massive as some of the numbers I've seen some of my competitors report. I think a lot of people put sublease space on the market. And again, the problem with how you look at the world is, if you look at it right now, it does not look very good for a lot of companies. I mean, this has been a very difficult period of time. And if I looked at it like this, it's definitely, of the 40 years I've been in commercial real estate, I've been through a lot of downturns. I started in 81 with one of the most difficult markets I think Portland's ever seen from a demand level. Our demand was at some of the lowest levels, and companies like Georgia Pacific were moving out of town. All that said, I mean, we're in just a really, really difficult time. And when my suburban buildings have a waiting line to get into most of the spaces, that's testament enough. And so you have that combination. But again, until we populate downtown, I think that's a short-term issue. And downtown still has the draw of restaurants and activity and the art scene and things that go beyond, do we just go to work and then come home every night? And my answer is, yeah, some people do. But some people want to go to work, and Dan lives downtown. I live 10 minutes from downtown. I couldn't live even, obviously I'm partial to it. I have investments downtown, but I like the scene of downtown. I want to live in an urban environment. Is it the safest environment? I don't know. I don't think urban environments are ever going to be as safe as probably some of its suburban counterparts. But it's what I enjoy. I like seeing people. I like seeing vibrancy. And I don't necessarily want to see all the same people. So in the 90s, everybody emptied downtown and we had some of the lowest occupancies downtown. And that's where downtown started to reformulate itself. It started looking at adding the art scene. We added the Performing Arts Center. We added the Schnitzer. A lot of great things were added in the 90s to, build the market up. And I think you'll see some of that in the long term. In the short term, there's going to be some pain, and it could take 3 to 5 years to really get the footing back. I mean, I'm optimistic. I think in a year you'll see much better, but it definitely will take 3 years to get us back to firm footing again.
Dan, any thoughts on that? If not, that's okay too.
Well said. I'm experiencing some of the similar things that Jim is talking about, so can't add to that.
I think before we jump into the Q&A, I'd like to hear from both of you. What has the pandemic taught you and or your company about your industry? And Dan, specifically, I'd love it if you would touch on, from a Mortensen being a general contractor, how has it affected your guys' safety company?
So it's impacted us in a lot of different ways, and I'll definitely talk to the safety aspect of it. Much of the technology and techniques that we're using today were already in existence, starting 10, 15 years ago, as far as capabilities of doing video conferencing and the working remotely and so forth. The pandemic has accelerated that just in a dramatic pace and forced us all to, try out this technology. And it's made us discover that it's added some efficiencies, but to my point earlier, in order for us to advance our business, our type of business, we need to get the majority of our people back together again. But that's not to say you can't offset with the, maybe every third meeting is virtual instead of, mix it up a little bit, cut down and travel a little bit. I mean, we are, as a company wide, we almost cut travel off completely. And we found that we saved, a huge amount of money as a national organization. But what did it cost us in team member morale? Did it cost us in the quality of our work, not having the right supervision, that types of thing? We're still evaluating that. But what I would say relative to safety, it's actually improved. Our safety performance as a company has improved significantly in the last year. And we are starting to study that and ask ourselves, well, why is that? Is that a fluke, or is that because of the pandemic? And much of it is because of the pandemic. We were all forced to slow down and reevaluate every single move that we make on a job site. First, by making sure the job site is cleaner. A cleaner job site is a better run job site and is more organized and more efficient. The fact that all the team members and the craft workers had to stay 6 feet apart, it forced us to think about every activity where it used to be, two guys just grab something and throw it up. Well, now it can only be one person because the other person can't be within 6 feet. And so it advanced other types of technology where we'd use equipment to lift that thing in place instead of 2 people lifting it in place, which is naturally safer, and using 2 lifts instead of 1, so that we're not. So there was a lot of just the fact that we had to have people really reconsider the tasks that they do every day has caused us to slow down and be safer, and our numbers are showing from that.
Thank you, sir. Jim, what about you in the sense of, what is this pandemic taught you about Melvin Mark and the commercial real estate industry in Portland?
So Jeff, I mean, I think that's one of the great questions out of all this. And I think we'll have a lot of time to try to figure that out over the next year or 2 years. But, right off the bat, it's communications, and communications when you're working apart and remote are just critical. We hold an all hands on deck with all of our employees, twice a month, and have conversations so that they hear what's going on. I put all my key executives on the phone call. There's 6 of us that will present. Not all of them present every call, and some of the calls don't go on forever, but we feel like people, again, some people are super comfortable working remotely. And we had some people in our company that honestly weren't that comfortable working remotely. And some of them asked to come back into the office, and we allowed them even early on. Again, our company is essential services, so we have to provide. I've asked, my building engineers and my technicians to come in since the pandemic started. They've been working every day, taking care of our office buildings and our clients. But the communications with all those people, and I like to call people sort of randomly. I'll talk to different people in our company and see how they're going. Our key executives, I have a one-on-one for half an hour to an hour with each one of them every week. It's this part, as Dan said, that I think is really, really tricky. We're not that, our performance in a lot of sectors are just down. And so it's hard to tell whether everybody's working at peak performance or whether some people are just working day and night. I know in my case, the deal with Zoom conferences, I joke because I used to have to travel 5-10 minutes. And so if I had a, hour meeting, I'd have a half-hour travel time or lunch, and people love to schedule lunches. And so a couple of days it's been 4:30 and I realize I haven't had a bite to eat since, 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock in the morning. And I'm not crazy about that. But I guess the silver lining too, for me, is during all the unrest, a bunch of our competitors came together. Vanessa Sturgeon and I work on a lot of projects together for the greater good of downtown. Patrick Gilligan of Lincoln Properties, Tom Kildane of Urban Renaissance. Just a lot of competitors came together, and we talk all the time now. We're all knew each other and I think worked together. But in this pandemic, the silver lining is we talk all the time and try to work and collaborate together. And that's brought some things like, how is our security not all tight? We all have private security in these big buildings. Why aren't they talking to each other? And how do we communicate? How do we make a better built environment? So I can complain about the city, I can complain about the police, I can complain about all this different stuff, but sometimes you have to look in the mirror. And during the pandemic, we have looked at some of our core functions, and they could use some improvement. And then a lot like Dan, we studied how do we get people safe coming into our building. We can only have 2 people in an elevator, hand sanitizers, some of the stuff we had done. But we read what a lot of our competitors were doing, and they called us, and we just shared. I don't think there's ever been a time when I've been in this business where we've shared more information with competitors and we've become closer. So there's the silver lining, I guess, out of all of that.
Co-opetition.
It's a good name. I've never heard that.
I want to make sure we give plenty of time for people. We have 2 unanswered questions, and please, everyone, if there's topics that we haven't covered, we really want to hear from you. So this person asked, and this is to both of you, could you comment on development and construction trends outside of the city center?
Well, we're definitely seeing more activity outside of the city center than we are downtown. a few years ago, there was 13 tower cranes downtown, and I think we're down to 3 or so right now, unfortunately. There's, the activity is definitely moving to the outskirts. Whether that's a pandemic, social unrest, or was a natural trend anyway, I don't know. I think Jim's probably got better insights on that. But we're doing some medical office buildings and some healthcare work, around the outskirts of town.
Yeah, I mean, I would, I don't know if it's a permanent trend. I think they go in cycles, and there hadn't been a lot built in the suburbs other than apartments and some hotels, not a lot even hotels in the last 10, 15 years. And, I think again, it's more of a, a trend that happens. I mean, we're again developing a 40,000 foot warehouse out in Tualatin, and that market's been really strong. I bought a lot of product out that different direction, and obviously the housing trends out there are really strong. So, there's some that just people decided in the pandemic, they wanted their office a little bit closer. And again, the warehousing trends are just, really strong. I mean, we bought Pacific Nutritional's headquarters or manufacturing facility in Tualatin, and Campbell Soup had bought that a while ago, and they are working, long shifts to produce enough food, during this pandemic. So again, there's been winners and losers out of this. The one thing neither of us have really talked about is the food industry, and it's been a very, very strong period of time, both in production and retail.
So Jim, just a question to you. Do you see an increased demand for cold storage and frozen storage because of the increased demand for food deliveries?
I think there will, Dan. I think, there was supply out there. Not very many people know, but I sat on the Henningsen Cold Storage Board for 14 years, and we just recently sold Henningsen to Lineage, a national company, and it had been a long-term Oregon company and local. And so I've, over the years, I've gotten to know that industry a little better. I wouldn't say I understand the operational part of it. I think it's the need, as this goes back and forth, obviously the need became more retail oriented versus restaurant. So it's like liquor sales. Liquor sales did really well, but the restaurants weren't part of that equation. So it was a little the same way with food. Cisco was probably not the great winner out of the pandemic because they provide, and I can't answer that. Somebody will probably say that they did great, but for the most part, they supply the the restaurant trade. So it's a little bit of a trade-off. But one thing's for sure is the populations grow. The need for food and fresh food, and we were saying, I think about a year ago, there was a day when we were all growing up and you could only get fresh fruit in certain times of the year. Now you can get a lot of fresh fruit all 365 days of the year, and it's not just magic. It's it's cold storage and it's production that's moved all around. So the need for that, I think, continues to grow, and it grows in the distribution corridors.
Thank you both. Our next question, I think this is an interesting, it's thought-provoking, is what things can companies strengthen during the next 3 to 5 years? And I'm assuming that's in reference to, I'm not sure if that's as a company, both of you help run companies. So, maybe that's something that, what are you guys planning, as much as you can share, of course, to help strengthen your firms over the next 3 to 5 years? And please, whoever wrote that question, if I misinterpreted that, I apologize.
I would say for us, one of the things that helped Mortenson flourish, or at least stay steady throughout the pandemic was our diversification. We're the largest wind farm builder in the country and the largest ground mount solar farm builder. And that business, stayed stable or even grew a little bit. We're a large data center builder, and that market grew. And we're a federal contractor. We do work on military bases around the country, and that work stayed steady. And so I think what this taught us is the importance of diversification and being in multiple markets, multiple customer types. And, we're also one of the largest sports builders in the country too, and that business kind of took a hit. So all the ups and downs balanced, and we had an okay year. So diversification is increasingly important.
And I'd agree. I mean, when my dad was alive, started buying warehouse almost, in the mid 90s, and he'd look at the performance of warehouse, and it's pretty tough when you go in buying warehouse because you usually buy it at a, competitive cap rate, and, it just doesn't perform for the first, 2 or 3 years. In this market it does, but typically it doesn't. And so it was always a hard sell buying more and more warehouse. But the warehouse has turned out to be a really good hedge. And like I said, the suburban, it's just not owning all the same type of product. And, for our investors, we like to diversify the hold, whether it's a single tenant type product or a value add. We buy all different types of product, but to compete against the nationals and to get our investors the kind of yield that they expect, we've got to have something or see something that nobody else saw. And in our industry, I think that's, increasingly becomes more and more difficult because we're competing against so many different really quality firms. But, like I talked about suburban, we just started to see the values 5 years ago. And we saw the rates starting to creep back up again. So we tried to buy a lot of that type of product. And same thing with industrial. And I bought the last industrial deal about 2 years ago, and bought another one like 3 or 4 years before that. But now it's really tough to compete. And then sort of finally, our firm's all about the people. And, if you don't have a great crew and great people, and I think that's been proven over and over again. And I'm just very fortunate. I work with the best people in our industry. And when we rehired 5 years ago, we were so fortunate to attract just great talent and people that care and work so hard. And that includes all the way through our organizations from, top to bottom. We recruited really good executive people, but we recruited really good property managers, really good building techs and engineers. And we just have a really strong deal. So when these bad times happen, and if I have a moment, I'll share a personal story. If you give me is it okay to just go on for another second?
Of course.
So I love riding motorcycles. So I took a motorcycle trip in May, and it was late May. And I found myself, the George Floyd murder happened that afternoon or late night. And when I went to bed, everything was calm in Portland. I got awoken at 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and my phone was sort of exploding with text messages. Nobody had called me, but text messages. And I ride with a group of guys, and we hadn't ridden very much, and we took 3 or 4 days, and I started packing my stuff, and I started throwing stuff on the bike about as quick as I could get it going. We were out in Joseph, and prepared to just go as fast as I could back to Portland. And about 20 minutes later, I looked myself in the mirror and go, "You got great people. They'll take care of it. You'll just be in their way." And my gut was really right. I would have been just in their way asking questions when they know what to do. People know what to do in crisis. So I just think that type of example is, if you don't have people that you can look to really take care of stuff, and you're always dashing from one area to the other, these are times to build your company with the best people that are out there. And that proves, I think, to be the case almost every time in companies that can outperform in whatever segment it is against their competitors.
Just to build on the importance of people, I think one of the advantages of having gone through this isolation period for a year is it forced us all to be very intentional about reaching out to our team members. We couldn't just run into them at the water cooler and say, "Hey, how you doing?" We needed to call them, text them, Teams them, Zoom them, whatever we could do to connect with them. And I would like to think, after doing that for a year, that we've gotten as a society better at reaching out and connecting with people, even if it's just for quick, "Hey, how you doing?" kind of sound bites. So I'm hoping that, obviously I'm hoping we all get back together, but there's going to always be an element now of remoteness and virtualness in how we do business for the rest of our lives. But my point is, I hope that intentionalism of connecting with people carries through forever.
Agreed.
Great comments.
shifting gears a little bit here, there's been two questions that are both related to the Vancouver market, so just across the river. The first one is from Ryan. Has there been differences between the Portland market and Vancouver market during this time? Design and permit process between the two, as well as wants and needs on the real estate side. So comparing Vancouver to Portland.
I'm happy to jump in, Dan, if you want me to start.
Sure.
They're two distinct markets. I think to try to look at Portland and Vancouver as the same market and spilling over the same MSA is a little bit bold of the type of product and what the two markets are trying to do. Vancouver has always been a great draw from a tax standpoint right across the river. But this time we're not seeing people stay in the Northwest, unfortunately. Well, we're seeing them stay in the Northwest, but they're going to Idaho, Wyoming, Las Vegas, or Nevada. They're really going to very preferential tax rates. And on an individual basis, again, I'm at the end of my, older part of my career or whatever you want to call it. And, if your kids don't live in Oregon, and I'm blessed, all four of my kids live in Oregon, but if say they don't, and I had a friend, one lived in Utah and one lives in Colorado, and he moved to Jackson Hole. It was pretty intentional. The tax rate is very preferential. Most of his income is ordinary income, and that's very beneficial. Whereas Washington is better, but if you're really making a move, and another friend, they had a major facility in Las Vegas, and when they passed the 3.5% daycare tax, that was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back from him. And he has a lot of ordinary income. So it's a little different this time around. Unfortunately, they're not just moving across the river, and I'm sure there are people that are doing that, but they're moving to different markets. If you get a chance, look at Bozeman, Montana. It's, for the size of a state it is, it's exploding. And a lot of it is people, even from a lifestyle standpoint, that are just saying, wow, COVID really taught me a lot of things. I don't want to be in a major city. So I invested in Sisters, Oregon. I've had a building there for 10 years. And I'm building another one with a partner outside my firm that I've known for a long time. He's got it 100% leased, and the area is just exploding. So whether it's Oregon or Idaho or Montana, there's a little bit of the small lifestyle that's starting to have an appeal. And again, this could reverse as COVID ends and people go, maybe I don't like living in a small city. That's maybe that isn't for me. I like the big city part of it. Whether it's permanent in the last, long time, that's yet to be seen. But I think those cities were growing even before COVID hit.
Yeah, that was my observation too, is that Vancouver was already growing and developing, and it's a super attractive place to be once you're there. The hindrance, of course, is the bridge and the commuting and access. And so since a lot of that traffic was freed up, that this whole COVID period might have accelerated something that was already happening. The question will be as far as development, in Southwest Washington. But the question will be, will we get back to the traffic patterns of pre-COVID, and will that slow things down a little bit? So just a observation on traffic. It's all about traffic.
You mentioned it, Dan. That kind of leads into the question that we have here is, are you seeing any of the urban Portland exodus to just across the border in Southwest Washington being drawn by the pre-COVID development there? So to me, I'm thinking about that whole, I don't know if Mortensen did some of that, the massive waterfront development that we've seen along the river in Vancouver.
No, we weren't involved. We looked at some of that earlier, probably 5 years ago. We looked at putting a hotel there, but we weren't sure. We didn't think it would pencil out because of the traffic issues, and we didn't think it would be as attractive for people to come up there. I'm not sure the word exodus is accurate. I think there was already development occurring. It just might have accelerated a little bit in the last year. But again, I think it's a very attractive place for people to work and live. It's just slowed down because of the lack of access until another bridge is put in place.
But you are starting to see product being built in Vancouver and, you know, along the waterfront. And I mean, it's a competitive market. It's just got a different dynamic. It's like comparing, you know, Lake Oswego, Cruiseway, Center Point, Lincoln Center 217, and trying to sort of say that they're, you know, similar. They're really, their appeal is very different, and why people want to go there. And some of it's just built on demographics of where people live. And as Dan said, you know, traffic was getting, I mean, right before the pandemic is the worst traffic I've seen in Portland. And, you know, the world is very different right now. You can get from one end of the city to the other pretty simply.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that leads to, I think our last question of the evening, unless anybody else has any, and maybe they could take some time to write it while we're asking this. But you know, both, I think, Dan, you had mentioned, you know, Mortensen is obviously a national contractor, and so, you know, in 2 years, or maybe it's more like, I think Jim, you mentioned earlier, maybe 3 years is a better time window. But let's say in 2 to 3 years. Where do you see the Portland real estate and construction markets? And then also, you know, in relation to the, you know, perhaps other parts of the country, showing us where we might be going, is, you know, are you seeing any trends in the Bay Area or Seattle that would make you be optimistic, or maybe a cause for concern?
I think we should be super optimistic. This is a guy that grew up in Wisconsin, and I could barely smell mountains. I could barely spell mountain, much less ever see one. To moving out to the Pacific Northwest, where I can't get enough of the views, the access to the ocean, the food, the hiking, just the outdoor lifestyle. My point being is, you know, we absolutely love living here. And, you know, pre-pandemic, people that moved to the Pacific Northwest, very few of them ever moved back from where they were. And so from our perception, you know, Portland is, even though it's not a true West Coast city, it's close enough to say it's one of the least expensive big cities to live in the West Coast. It's like this gem that's still hidden away. And, you know, California filled up and got weird, you know, 25, 30 years ago. And then people shifted to Seattle, and now Seattle's starting to fill up. And I think on a national level, people are still seeing that Portland has this great opportunity from, you know, comparing real estate costs and cost of living and so forth. It's actually significantly lower than other West Coast cities, even though it's higher than from where I came from. So I'm super, on a personal level, I'm super optimistic and bullish that we're going to get through this. We just got to change the national perception, and that, you know, Portland area is just a really cool, interesting, unique place to live, and more people are going to be moving here over the next 20 years. It's also, you know, the Portland, Vancouver, Seattle, and then Vancouver, British Columbia is identified as one of the mega regions. You know, as you look at urban trends and the trends towards urbanization, there's you know, like a dozen areas in the country that are accelerating and growing faster as a urban center or as a mega city. And a mega city or a mega region is defined as 10 million people or more. So they call it kind of that Cascade region is definitely a mega region that is very attractive. And as public transportation improves and high-speed rail, you know, eventually high-speed rail can connect Vancouver, British Columbia to Portland, and you can travel back and forth in 2 hours. It's going to make it all one big region where you can commute there and have meetings and come back in the same day. And I still think that's, you know, that's all true. That's all possible. We just got to get through this pandemic. You're on mute, Jim.
Oh,
Jim?
what?
Oh, now we can hear you.
Oh, good. So I would agree by and large with Dan's statement. I think we have a lot of challenges to, you know, work through along with COVID, and some things that we just had not addressed in full, with full participation. You know, our homeless situation really got to the point where we hadn't answered a lot of questions and figured out what it is we're going to do. So You know, we would all agree that we want, you know, we don't want people living on the streets, and what's going on right now is not acceptable as a society. But, you know, once you take a look at it, and maybe the crisis drove a lot of these issues to people really paying attention, but I've had an outpouring of people trying to help. And, you know, people want to see the city succeed. And what Dan said is exactly correct. We've been dealt a great hand. We're in one of the most beautiful scenic areas where you can go hike the mountains, ski the mountains, go to the coast. And I've got a place down on the coast, and I got to tell you, I'm an hour and 10 minutes driveway to driveway. Tell me places that you can do things like that. You're an hour and 20 minutes up to the mountains. You've got all these great resources, and you've got a community that I think, you know, I've met so many great people over my 61 years of living here, from growing up here to being fortunate enough to do business here. People in the Northwest and people in Portland are genuine people. And again, I know we've got our issues, and I wouldn't argue with anybody that says, you know, right now is a challenging time. But I would say that we've got a great community that's very close. And again, my silver lining out of this is my competitors that I compete, and we compete every day, and we compete really hard, but that we're on the phone with each other, you know, 4 or 5 times a week. That's pretty unique. And I don't think you could say that in every city. So I'm like Dan, I think it's a great spot. I think we're going to get through this, and hopefully I'm wrong on 3 years and it's 1 year or 9 months or 6 months. But we live in a great place, and we're very fortunate. So I keep on working every day.
Love it. Well, Mike Salzgiver, who asked a great question, maybe this is a good one to close with, is, you know, you guys are helping out with, you know, Greater Portland or Rose City Collective, but like, you know, us as, and the majority of people on this call are AGC members, you know, what can an organization like AGC do to support not only our construction industry, but Jim, also the, you know, the commercial real estate development industry?
So, you know, we founded with the Rose City Collective crowdfunding or GoFundMe of helping small retailers rebuild their glass. We hope to raise 2,500. We raised 25,000. We've got Fund 2 coming up. And these small retailers need help. They can't get insurance to repair their glass. To the extent that you can help people out right now, that's a great source of helping people. The other thing is, expect more from your elected officials. I mean, I spend a lot of time with elected officials, and too many people tend to complain and in a non-constructive way. If you're gonna work on a solution, you got to come to the table and figure out how we're all going to solve this. Not just expecting elected officials will not do the job. It's the community. And what I've told everybody over the last couple of months is, if you want to help, have conversations with them. Boy, I saw this. How can I put together a group of cleaning downtown? Solve did that. So there's Solve events that you can help with. A guy by the name of Frank, it's called Adopt a Block. And he came up with a program. He's got almost, I think, 1,800 blocks that he's adopted throughout the city, not just downtown, but all the way through our city, where you have a local leader that helps clean up your block and you work on that. There's just great programs out there right now to help. And if anybody, you know, wants to be plugged in, I'm happy. You can look at Rose City Portland Rose City Portland Downtown Collective. We've got a website. You can put that in the Google search, and if you can't find it, ping me at jmark, JMARK at melvinmark.com. But we're going to have a couple programs that we're going to be rolling out in the next couple months. Sam Adams is going to be having a Reopen Portland campaign that we're going to be working on. All I can tell you is 50% of my time is trying to work, Mike, with different groups and trying to connect all the dots and make sure that we get this great city back on the footing that it deserves.
Dan, any thoughts on that before we close?
It's hard to follow that, but it's so true. We all just need to band together and stay positive. Glass half full. We're all in this together. Portland's just a great place to live and work. And anything we can do to support all those organizations that you talked about, whether it's financially or otherwise, so we can turn around the perception, would be my recommendation.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. And I know it's a Monday night and it's almost 7 o'clock. So we really do appreciate both of you sharing your insights and your thoughts with us. And again, unfortunately, we can't be sharing over a beer right now, but definitely look forward to hopefully getting together soon. Evan and Allie, I'm not sure if I missed anything, but I think that will pretty much wrap it up for the first CLC event of 2021. So I really appreciate everyone taking the time to call in and join.
Nope, great job, Jeff. Thank you, gentlemen. We really appreciate it.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Wonderful rest of
Have
your
a great night. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Cheers.
very much appreciated. Nice job, Jeff.
Bye-bye.